The lilies were already starting to wilt. Their sweet, heavy scent hung in the air, like something that didn't belong there anymore, like grief that had overstayed its welcome. The living room felt smaller than it ever had before. Too many bodies, too many whispers, too many eyes pretending not to watch. My husband lay in the casket just 5 feet away. 5 feet. 37 years of marriage reduced to 5 feet of distance, and a polished wooden box. I had been standing near the fireplace, my fingers tracing the edge of the mantel, where our anniversary photo still sat, when Andrew's voice cut through the low murmur of condolences. "This isn't your home anymore." At first, I thought I misheard him. Grief does strange things to the ears. It bends sound. It distorts meaning. But then he stepped closer. "Get out." The slap came so suddenly that I didn't even have time to turn my head. The crack echoed in the room louder than any prayer spoken that afternoon. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere in the dining room. Someone gasped. My cheek burned. Not the soft sting of an accident. Not the accidental brush of frustration. This was deliberate. I looked at him. My son. The boy I had carried for 9 months, through morning sickness and swollen ankles. The toddler who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. The teenager whose broken heart I had stitched back together after his first girlfriend left him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His jaw was tight. His hands trembled, not from guilt, but from anger. Behind him, his wife stood with her arms crossed. Her lips were pressed into a thin line that almost resembled satisfaction. "You've overstayed," she said quietly. "We need space. We're starting fresh. Starting fresh." My husband's body was still in the room. I tasted iron in my mouth where my teeth had caught the inside of my cheek. No one stepped forward. Not my sister-in-law. Not Andrew's cousin. Not the neighbors who had eaten at my table for decades. Silence can be louder than violence. I adjusted my coat. My suitcase was still near the hallway, half unpacked from the hospital the week before. I had never imagined I would need it again so soon. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply picked up the handle. The wheels rolled softly across the hardwood floor that Thomas and I had laid ourselves one summer when Andrew was 8. I remembered how Andrew had insisted on helping, carrying planks too heavy for his small arms. I paused at the door. For just a second. I wanted, foolishly, for him to say something. To remember. To stop me. He didn't. The door closed behind me with a sound softer than the slap. Outside, the air was bitter and sharp. Alaska winters do not ease you into their cold, they seize you fully. Snow drifted down in slow spirals, landing in my hair, on my lashes. I inhaled. The cold felt cleaner than the room I had just left. I walked down the driveway past the roses Thomas had planted on our 20th anniversary. They were buried under snow now, but I could still see where they grew. Past the porch light Andrew used to forget to turn off. Past the mailbox that still carried both our names. Carter. Not just his. At the end of the street, I called a taxi. The driver didn't ask questions. That night, in a motel room that smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I replayed the sound in my head. The slap. The words. "This isn't your home anymore." It was strange how wrong he was. Because the house wasn't just walls. It was signatures. It was ink. It was paper. And my name was on all of it. Thomas had insisted back in 1987. "Your credit's better," he had said, embarrassed but practical. "We'll do this together." We had signed together. Mortgage documents, deed transfers, refinancing agreements during the hard years when his business failed. Every single page carried 2 names. Thomas Carter. Eileen Carter. Equal. When he fell ill, I worked double shifts at the clinic. I cleaned houses on weekends. I skipped buying new coats for myself so Andrew could have the newest textbooks. Andrew never knew how tight money became. I didn't want him to. I wanted him to feel secure, loved, protected. That had been my mistake. Protection without boundaries breeds entitlement. 3 days after the funeral, I went to the bank. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat across from the loan officer. "I'd like to revoke automatic payments," I said calmly. She looked surprised. "You're listed as co-borrower," she confirmed after checking her screen. "You have full authority." I signed the form. The pen felt steady in my hand. 35 years of payments. Hundreds of sacrifices. 10 seconds of ink to pause it all. I left with copies of everything. At my small apartment, temporary, modest, quiet, I plugged in the USB Thomas had prepared years ago. He had always been more observant than I realized. "Just in case," he'd said once, handing me a sealed envelope weeks before he died. "If he ever forgets who you are." Inside that envelope had been a supplemental will, a clause, clear and precise. If Andrew ever verbally abused, physically harmed, or unlawfully evicted me from the family home, his inheritance would be void, transferred entirely to me. At the time I had laughed softly. "He'd never," I had said. Thomas had looked at me with tired but knowing eyes. "Love makes you hopeful, but hope doesn't change human nature." I hadn't wanted to believe him. Now, sitting alone at my small kitchen table, I listened to the recording I hadn't even realized I had made. After Thomas's first stroke, I had gotten into the habit of recording important conversations, medical instructions, appointments. The device had been in my coat pocket at the funeral. It captured everything. His voice. Cold. Clear. "This isn't your home anymore. Get out." And the sharp crack that followed. I forwarded the file to Megan, our attorney. Within 48 hours, the estate was frozen. Andrew called that night. His voice sounded smaller. "Mom, we got a notice. Something about foreclosure?" I let the silence stretch. "Did you stop the payments?" "Yes." "Why would you do that?" His panic rose quickly. "We'll lose the house. You told me it wasn't mine." He inhaled sharply. That was grief talking. "No," I said softly. "That was truth." He began to cry. For a moment, just one, I felt the old instinct rise inside me. The instinct to soothe, to fix, to protect. I swallowed it. "I can't help you," I said. And I hung up. Weeks passed. They renovated. Posted pictures online. Fresh start. Our forever home. I watched quietly. 31 days after payment stopped, the default notice arrived. This time, his call came frantic. "Mom, please. We didn't mean it. Meaning isn't what matters. Action is." The family meeting was arranged soon after. Neutral ground. Megan laid out the documents. The audio played in the silent room. Andrew's face drained of color as his own voice betrayed him. Inheritance revoked. Full estate transferred. Legally binding. When it was my turn to speak, I said only one thing. "I was your mother. You treated me like a tenant?" I left before anyone could respond. A week later, he appeared at my apartment door in the rain. He knelt, apologized, begged. His wife stood behind him, quieter now. "The bank won't talk to us," he said. "We're not authorized." "You're not." I agreed. "Please just reinstate it. We'll pay." I handed him the final document. "I sold it." His eyes widened. "To who?" "The Elder Protection Foundation." The house would become transitional housing for displaced senior women. Women who had been told they were no longer welcome. His shoulders collapsed. "It was our home." "No," I said gently. "It was ours. And then it was mine." He cried harder than I had ever seen him cry. I felt something inside me loosen, not revenge, not triumph. Release. "I forgive you," I said. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequence. I closed the door. Months later, I used part of the sale to buy a small cabin near a quiet lake in Alaska. Nothing extravagant. Wood stove. Front porch. Water that reflected the sky so clearly, it looked like another world beneath it. The first night I slept there, I slept without dreaming. In the mornings, I drink coffee on the porch and watch the mist lift from the water. No shouting, no tension, no erasing, just breath. I began recording my story. Not for revenge, for remembrance. Other women wrote to me, called, shared their own silences. I realized something powerful. Age does not weaken you, it sharpens you. Silence is not surrender, it is preparation. Andrew wrote once, months later, a letter, handwritten. He said he was in therapy, that he was ashamed, that he finally understood what entitlement looks like when it stares back at you in the mirror. I haven't responded yet. Maybe I will someday, maybe not. But I know this. I did not lose a home. I lost an illusion, and in its place I found something better, peace. And peace is not something you beg for. It is something you protect, even if it costs you everything. The lake changes color depending on the hour. In the early morning it is silver, like a sheet of brushed steel. By afternoon it softens into blue, and at night it becomes ink, thick and endless. I sit on the porch and watch it shift, and sometimes I think that is what grief really is. Not a storm, not a single crashing wave, but a body of water that keeps changing shape long after everyone else thinks it should have settled. I did not expect the quiet to be this loud. In the house I left behind, there was always noise. Cabinets closing too hard. Television murmuring in the background. The faint clicking of my daughter, in-law's heels against tile. Even silence there had weight to it, like it was pressing against my ribs. Here, silence is space. The first week in the cabin, I woke up before dawn every morning, heart racing, convinced I had overslept for a shift at the clinic. Old habits don't fade easily. I would sit upright in bed, breath shallow, then remember. I had resigned. I had walked into the clinic 2 days after selling the house and handed in my notice. You don't have to do this. My supervisor had said gently, I know. I told her. That's why I can. For decades I worked because I had to. Bills, tuition, prescriptions, mortgage payments. Now, for the first time since I was 22, I was waking up without a financial fire at my back. It felt almost sinful. The cabin had come furnished with the basics. A narrow wooden bed, a pine table scarred by previous owners, 2 mismatched chairs, a bookshelf that leaned slightly to the left. I ran my fingers over the imperfections and smiled. Nothing here pretended to be perfect. I unpacked slowly. The photo of Thomas went on the mantel above the wood stove. In it, he is laughing, head thrown back, eyes crinkled, dirt on his cheek from the garden. I set it there and whispered, we did it. I don't know if I meant surviving the marriage, surviving the illness, or surviving our son. Maybe all of it. Sometimes at night I replay the moment of the slap, not to relive the pain, but to understand it. People think betrayal is loud and dramatic, but it isn't. Betrayal is built in small allowances. The first time Andrew spoke sharply to me at dinner, and I brushed it off. The first time his wife rolled her eyes, and I pretended not to notice. The time she redecorated the living room without asking, and I said, it looks lovely, even though she had boxed up the quilt Thomas's mother made. Every time I swallowed my discomfort to keep peace. Peace built on silence is not peace. It is postponement. I see that now. One evening, about a month after I moved, there was a knock at the cabin door. Out here, knocks are rare. I opened it cautiously. It was a woman in her late 60s, bundled in a thick parka, cheeks red from the cold. You must be Eileen, she said with a warm smile. I'm Margaret. I live down the trail a bit. I invited her in. We sat at the pine table with 2 mugs of tea between us. She told me she had heard about the house donation from a local newsletter. News travels even to quiet places. That was brave, she said. It was necessary, I replied. She nodded like she understood something deeper than the words. Margaret told me she had left her home 10 years earlier. Different story. Same route. A daughter who decided her mother was in the way. She hadn't had a legal clause to protect her. She had left with a suitcase and never gone back. We survive, she said softly. But we shouldn't have to survive our own children. After she left, I sat for a long time thinking about that sentence. We shouldn't have to survive our own children. When Andrew was born, I remember counting his fingers and toes like they were precious jewels. I remember the way he would cling to my blouse when strangers held him. I was his safety. At some point, the roles shifted, and I became disposable. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe when he married. Maybe when Thomas got sick and I grew too tired to assert myself. Maybe when he realized the house would someday be his. Inheritance can distort love if it's expected rather than earned. I received a certified letter 3 months after the sale. Andrew and his wife had filed a petition contesting the transfer. I wasn't surprised. Megan handled it swiftly. The documentation was airtight. The audio indisputable. The timeline clear. The petition was dismissed. When Megan called to tell me, she asked gently, "How are you holding up?" I looked out at the lake. "I'm not holding anything anymore," I said. I finally set it down. Winter deepened. Snow layered thick against the cabin windows. I learned to chop wood without blistering my hands. I learned which logs burned longer and which sparked too much. I learned the rhythm of solitude. And in that rhythm, I began to feel something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for the slap. Not for the humiliation. But for the clarity it forced. If Andrew had not pushed me out so violently, I might still be there, shrinking quietly, adjusting curtains that were no longer mine, apologizing for existing in a house built by my own labor. Pain, when it breaks you open, can also break your cage. In early spring, when the ice began to crack along the edges of the lake, I received another letter. This one was not legal. It was handwritten. Andrew's. The envelope trembled in my fingers longer than I cared to admit before I opened it. Mom, I don't know how to begin. I've rewritten this letter more times than I can count. There isn't an excuse that doesn't sound hollow. I was angry. I was grieving. But none of that explains why I raised my hand to you. I'm ashamed of the man I was that day. We've moved into a rental in town. It's small. Humbling. I found a copy of Dad's old toolbox in the garage while packing. It made me realize how much of what I have was built by you and him. I'm in therapy, not because I was forced to be, because I need to understand why I thought I was entitled to something I didn't earn. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. You were never in the way. You were the foundation. Andrew, I read it 3 times. The first time with anger. The second time with skepticism. The third time with something softer. I placed the letter beside Thomas's photo on the mantel. Forgiveness is not a switch you flip. It is a door you decide whether to unlock. I have not unlocked it yet. But I no longer feel the need to barricade it either. The cabin creaks at night when the temperature drops. Sometimes I wake and listen to the wood contracting, the wind brushing against the walls. I feel safe here. That word used to mean something different. Safe used to mean surrounded by family. Now it means surrounded by respect. There is a difference. In the afternoons, I record new episodes of my story. Women from across the country send messages. Some were slapped. Some were simply dismissed. Some signed away houses they helped pay for because they were too tired to fight. We talk about boundaries. We talk about financial literacy. We talk about the myth that motherhood requires martyrdom. I tell them what I learned too late. Love your children, but keep your name on the deed. Keep your accounts transparent. Keep copies of everything. Trust is beautiful. Documentation is wiser. When summer finally arrives, the lake sparkles instead of brooding. Wildflowers bloom along the path Margaret showed me. I begin to take longer walks. One afternoon, as I stand near the water's edge, I imagine Andrew as a little boy running toward me with scraped knees. "Mum," he would cry, and I would kneel, every time, without hesitation. That instinct never truly leaves. But instinct must be guided by wisdom. If he ever comes here, truly comes, not to reclaim property, not to beg for money, but to rebuild something honest, I will listen. Listening does not mean surrendering. It means evaluating. The difference is something I understand now. I lost a house. I lost an illusion of unconditional gratitude. But I gained sovereignty. I gained rest. I gained a voice that no longer shakes when I use it. The slap that once burned my cheek now feels distant, like thunder from a storm that has already passed over the mountains. The echo remains, but it no longer controls the sky. I am not the woman who walked down that driveway with a suitcase anymore. I am the woman who chose where to plant her next foundation. And this time, it rests on land that answers only to me. The lake is calm tonight. The sky stretches wide and unbroken above it. I sit on the porch wrapped in my crocheted blanket, Thomas's photo glowing faintly in the lamplight behind me. For years I believed my worth was measured by how much I could endure quietly. Now I know better. My worth is measured by what I refuse to endure, and I refuse to disappear. Not for grief. Not for guilt. Not even for my own son. Silence once kept the peace for everyone else. Now it keeps the peace for me. And that is enough. The first time I laughed again, it surprised me. It wasn't a polite laugh or the kind you give when someone expects you to respond. It rose from somewhere deep and unguarded. Margaret had slipped on a patch of mud by the lake, and instead of falling, she windmilled her arms, so dramatically that we both burst into laughter before she even regained her balance. The sound echoed across the water. For a moment, I felt almost guilty. How could laughter exist in the same body that had held so much humiliation? But grief and joy are not opposites. They are neighbors. One moves out a little at a time, and the other slowly takes its place. Summer stretched long and golden. I planted a small garden beside the cabin, nothing ambitious. Potatoes, carrots, a few stubborn tomato plants that didn't seem to mind the shorter growing season. Digging my hands into the soil grounded me in a way I hadn't felt in years. In the old house, I gardened too, but it had become something I did quietly, between dinners and laundry and unspoken tensions. Here, every seed I planted felt intentional. One afternoon, as I knelt pressing seedlings into the earth, I realized something simple and startling. I was no longer waiting. For decades I had been waiting. Waiting for Thomas to recover. Waiting for Andrew to mature. Waiting for respect. Waiting for someone to notice how much I was carrying. Now there was nothing left to wait for. Life was not on pause. It was happening. I began driving into town once a week to volunteer at a small community center. They hosted legal literacy workshops for seniors, how to read mortgage documents, how to avoid financial exploitation, how to maintain ownership rights. The first time I stood in front of a room of gray-haired women clutching notepads, my hands trembled slightly. My name is Eileen, I began. And I'm here because I almost lost everything I helped build. Their eyes lifted in unison. I told them about co-signing loans, about keeping copies, about clauses most people never think to request. I did not dramatize the slap. I did not dwell on it. I focused on empowerment. After the session, a woman with trembling fingers approached me. My son has been pressuring me to put his name on my house, she whispered. He says it's just practical. I held her gaze. Practical for who? She swallowed. For him, I suppose. Then make sure it's practical for you too, I said gently. Love does not require you to surrender leverage. She nodded slowly, like something had unlocked inside her. That night, back at the cabin, I sat by the fire and thought about the woman I used to be. The version of me who believed good mothers sacrifice without question. The version who equated endurance with virtue. No one teaches you that boundaries are a form of love, not just love for yourself, but love that is honest. Andrew wrote again in late autumn. This letter was shorter. Mom, I understand if you never respond. I just wanted you to know that I drove past the foundation last week. The sign for the transitional home is up. They're calling it Second Lighthouse. It made me think about how many times you must have felt like you were living in the dark. I'm trying to be better. I hope someday I can show you that instead of just writing about it. Second Lighthouse. The name settled into my chest with unexpected warmth. I had not chosen it. The foundation had, but it felt right. A second light, not a replacement, not a do-over, but another chance to see clearly. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the first. I still did not respond. Forgiveness is not owed on a schedule. Winter returned as it always does, sudden and uncompromising. The lake froze thick and solid. Snow blanketed the cabin roof in heavy silence. One evening, as wind howled against the walls, I lost power. The cabin went dark in an instant. For a brief second, panic flared in my chest. Old memories of instability surfaced, hospital rooms, financial uncertainty, emotional chaos. But then I breathed. I lit the oil lamp stored on the shelf. The small flame flickered, steady and contained. The darkness did not feel threatening. It felt manageable. I sat beside the lamp and realized something profound. For years, I had been afraid of losing light, the house, the marriage, the family structure. But light does not live in structures. It lives in you. The power returned an hour later. I didn't rush to turn on the overhead lights. The small flame was enough. Spring thawed the world once again. One morning, Margaret arrived at my door looking unusually solemn. There's someone asking about you in town, she said gently. My stomach tightened. Who? A man. Late 40s. Looks like he hasn't slept well in months. Andrew. I felt it before she even confirmed it. He didn't ask for your address, she added quickly. Just whether you were doing all right. I sat down slowly at the table. I had imagined this moment many times. In some versions, I embraced him immediately. In others, I turned him away. Reality felt more complicated. Did he seem angry? I asked. No, she said softly. He seemed small. Small. I remembered him at 5 years old, standing at the edge of the lake back when we used to visit Alaska during summers. He had been afraid of the water then. It's too big, he'd said. I had knelt beside him. You don't have to conquer it, I told him. Just respect it. Maybe life was finally teaching him the same lesson. 2 days later, there was a knock on my door. Firm this time. Not timid. I opened it. Andrew stood there, older than when I last saw him, grayer at the temples. His shoulders no longer squared with arrogance, but with something closer to humility. We looked at each other for a long moment. Neither of us spoke first. I won't come in unless you ask, he said quietly. I appreciated that. I'll step outside, I replied. We stood on the porch. The lake shimmered behind me. He glanced at it. It's beautiful, he said. Yes, I answered. I understand if you don't want to see me. I'm seeing you now. He swallowed. I was wrong. The words came without defensiveness, without justification. I know, I said. I've spent the last year trying to understand why I felt entitled to something you built. I didn't rescue him from the discomfort, he continued. I think I confused inheritance with ownership and grief with permission. I let that settle between us. I can't undo what I did, he said. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure I never become that man again. The wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time since the funeral, I saw not the man who slapped me, but the boy who once needed guidance. I forgive you, I said. The words felt different this time. Not defensive, not forced, clean. He exhaled shakily. I don't expect anything more. You won't get anything more, I said calmly. Forgiveness is not restoration of privileges. He nodded quickly. I understand. We stood there a while longer, not as enemies, not yet as family, but as two people acknowledging truth. Before he left, he hesitated. Dad would have liked this place, he said softly. Yes, I replied, he would have. When his car disappeared down the dirt road, I did not feel emptied. I felt steady. The past no longer felt like an open wound. It felt like a scar, visible, permanent, but no longer bleeding. That night, as I sat by the window watching the last light fade across the lake, I reflected on everything that had unfolded. The slap, the foreclosure, the sale, the cabin, the letters, the visit. None of it erased the pain, but all of it built something stronger than the house ever did. I once believed security came from walls, from property, from family titles. Now I understand. Security comes from clarity, from documentation, from boundaries, from self-respect, and from knowing that even if someone tries to push you out of your own life, you can choose where to rebuild. I did not keep the house. I kept my dignity. I did not restore the past. I redefined my future. And every morning, when I step onto this porch and breathe in the cold, clean air of Alaska, I remember the woman who walked away with a suitcase and nothing else. She thought she was losing everything. She had no idea she was finally gaining herself. And that, more than any deed or clause or courtroom victory, is what saved me.